Okay, I have the top of the hour now and we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Twin Powers Unite Reading Project, teaching AAC Core and Dolch sight words. Saltillo is honored and excited to have Maureen Castillo presenting as our guest. Okay. First, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping so that you know how to work with the control panel. So you'll see that you should have a control panel that is similar to the one that you see on the screen, depending if you're using a Windows or a Mac computer, but they will all have the same functions. So you can see that you can expand or collapse the control panel with the orange arrow. If we were to unmute you, which is a possibility at the end with questions, you will have the option to unmute yourself when I select unmute all. Currently, everyone is muted to cut down on the background noise and disruptions. If you have a question at any time, you can type it into the chat window. You have the option to raise your hand as well. So if you have a question, we'll be doing questions at the end of the seminar so that time permits us to get through everything. You will also see an area for downloading materials. There are some materials that go along with the webinar as well as your ASHA materials. So you'll see your participation forms and the instructions for submitting the ASHA after the seminar has ended. You'll also receive these materials in an email about an hour after the presentation. Next slide. Because this is an ASHA presentation, we do have a couple of disclosures to go through. Maureen does not have any financial relationships with Saltillo, and her non-financial disclosure is being an ASHA member. My name is Lisa Tim, and I am an employee owner of Saltillo Corporation. My non-financial disclosures include being an ASHA member, ASHA SIG 12, Iowa Speech and Hearing, and also on the USAC board as well as a member. This is offered for 1 hour, so you'll get 1 hour of ASHA credit. And we can move to the next slide. Nope.
Okay, is that it?
Yep, that's
Is that everything, Lisa?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Can everybody hear me? I'm Maureen, and I'm here in sunny today, Denver, Colorado. A new record here, and I have been an SLP for over 27 years, and about 17 of those I specialized in AAC in the public schools. And I am currently an AT specialist for Adams 12 5-star schools, which is a suburb of Denver. And I do am the owner and provider of AAC in-home private therapy. My company is called iTherapy LLC. So I just wanted to talk today about the challenges of implementing an AAC device in the public schools. And even though I'm targeting public schools, I want to say I think that all of us out there sometimes have challenges, whether it's home or a clinic or a hospital setting, implementing AAC across the day. So right now I'm a district consultant, and I have the privilege of seeing many classrooms across a large district of over 40,000 students, and being the point person for over 200 AAC users. And one of the problems or challenges I encounter is really great instruction or therapy happening in silos. By that I mean that a student does a great job using his or her device in speech therapy and at snack time, but rarely uses it throughout the entire day. Or he or she uses it really well with the SLP, or maybe with the teacher, or maybe one of the 4 paraprofessionals who work with him or her, but not everyone. So I developed the Twin Powers in an attempt to change this paradigm shift, because I saw really great people working really hard, but with a lack of continuity and expectations across the day, we weren't making as much progress as we would hope. The other thing I want to say I saw, and we'll talk about this as I get into it, is sometimes a disconnect. So maybe in speech therapy, the student might be working on using their device to answer WH questions, for example, and in their literacy instruction they were doing something completely different. At a different time of the day they were doing something completely different, and we weren't seeing enough generalization. So there are several challenges. So one of the challenges is, where do I start? What is the focus? And by that, I would say that every year I train a new group of young SLPs and teachers and classroom aides, as well as parents who are new to the AAC world. And the first question is, where do I start? This is so overwhelming, and without kind of everyone on the same page, like I alluded to earlier, we can have really good people doing really good things, but not as make as much progress as we would like because we're not focusing on the same things. So another challenge I see specifically in the public schools, but I think, again, is something that maybe other private practice or hospital or clinic settings just don't see this as readily as I do, is that we have a multitude of people who might work with some of our students who use AAC to communicate. We have paraprofessionals, we have, so we need to teach not only the student, sometimes the SLP, so maybe the device is funded by a private SLP, but the school SLP is not as familiar with it, so we need to do some training there. The classroom teacher, maybe the special education teacher, there might be a physical therapist or an occupational therapist or behavior therapist in the picture, absolutely the parents, and the one that's not on the umbrella and probably one of the most important groups are the classroom aides or the paraeducators. Sometimes those are the people who spend the very most time with the AAC user but receive the least amount of instruction and training. And any of us who have worked this for years, they often are the person who knows them the best. So all those people need to be trained to have a successful device user. Another huge challenge and kind of the real impetus for the project was that generalization, that we all need to get better at generalizing from one setting to the next. So again, we can have great instruction happening in those silos, but it's not happening across the day. It might be happening in one-on-one therapy, but not happening at home, at school, wherever. And so I go into classrooms and the speech therapist will report to me, oh, I had a great session, he's using the device really, really well. And then I walk into the classroom and I'll say, well, where's the device? And they'll say, oh, I put it on his desk, but he doesn't use it, or we only use it at snack time, or we don't take it with us to art. So those are really common responses, and again, I allude to those not because people don't have really good intentions, but it's a lack of training to get the device in all settings all the time. Challenge 4 is including AAC in the literacy world. So access to books our students can independently read or share in the reading is a challenge. So many, many hours of teachable moments are lost when our students are asked to read silently in class. They may be looking at the pictures of the text but haven't developed a library of books which they can read independently or at least identify some of the words. So they aren't truly engaged in the reading time allotted to them. Additionally, parents often don't know how to incorporate the device into literacy at home, so our students may not be getting as many minutes practicing their reading outside of school. So that's a big concern. There's a big emphasis on literacy in AAC, as there absolutely should be, but I don't think that sometimes people have the tools to advance kids as far as they can go, and that's relatively new that we started really focusing on literacy, and most of our kids are not on grade level. And so some teaching methodology needs to change. So with all of those challenges in mind, I came up with what I call the Twin Powers Project. And it kind of has 5 pillars is the way I want to think about it. And the first, the 5 pillars are core, sight words, partner augmented input or modeling, the peer modeling, and literacy. And if we can get all of those pillars in place, we will have a greater chance of implementation across the day and generalization to all settings. So let's talk about each of those pillars. So pillar 1 is core language, which is a small set of commonly used words that support communication and language learning. 85% of what we say is communicated with only 200 basic words or about that. Mostly pronouns, verbs, descriptors, and prepositions, very few nouns, and those of us who have been doing this for a while, that's a little bit of a shift in focus because for years we really trained kids with groups and groups of nouns. Consistent across place, topic, and cognitive ability. And so for a child to become an effective communicator, either verbally or with the assistance of a device, he or she must master these basic words. So I would say core language is really second nature to most SLPs. What I would say from my experience working in the public schools is it's a completely different concept for many of our classroom teachers, our general education teachers, our special education teachers, and other therapists as well as parents. They are might be stuck on that labeling and those nouns. So I think we really have to have some in-depth discussions with people about what we mean when we say core language. There are lots and lots of lists of core words out there. So this is the one we chose. You can choose a different list. Like I said, there are lots and lots of them out there, and any list you choose, there's a great deal of overlap in those words. So in the state of Colorado, we use the dynamic learning maps as our alternative assessment. So that is based on Karen Erickson's work out of the University of North Carolina, and those words are recommended for students who use AAC. So these words were selected in Karen's consortium of a larger core vocabulary set based on their usefulness in everyday communication and in addressing the DLM essential elements. So what that means is this is where I started. It by no means means where you need to start, but I think you need to kind of figure out what are your 40 top core words. And again, you can go to many, many different lists. Because I'm in this school and kind of looked at it through that lens, and all of my students have to take this alternative assessment, that was my hook to getting some of my teachers on board. And again, we could sit here and discuss, the lists and all of that, but there's so much overlap, and every vendor, every device has some sort of core framework. So I don't want to get hung up on that, because I think you could, they're very, very similar. So just a note about those DLM first 40. So you saw them and you have them in your packet. They are the first 40 suggested words divided into 10 groups of 4 words each. So the vocabulary selection is research-based, however, the organization is not. The grouping of 4 words is one approach to the organization. The organization was based on providing multiple opportunities for expression as well as receptive input and modeling if a student could only handle 4 symbols at a time. So if you want more on this topic, you can certainly go to Center for Literacy and Disability Studies, and that's in the lower left-hand corners, because I want to give credit to Karen and her group and this fantastic research she has done. So one of the things you have to kind of start out and have a discussion with people, especially general education teachers and a special education teacher, if you're having students who are included and differentiating that curriculum, is looking at those vocabulary decisions and that continuum of usefulness. So again, there's lots and lots of fringe vocabulary that's really, really predominant in the public school because it's academic, but we really have to have those discussions if that's going to give kids very limited opportunities and very specific references, as opposed to using core, where we can get lots of opportunities to teach throughout the day. Now, I know that's very, very common knowledge to, again, the AAC community and the SLPs out there, but again, I don't want to drive the point home too hard, but in my discussions with public school, special education, and general ed teachers, as well as parents, and then para-educators, who are often the ones who are differentiating curriculum, this is not common knowledge. So I don't want to undermine any, I think you need to have some conversations with people about core and why it's so darn important.
Would you like to do the poll?
So that's
Maureen, would you like to do the poll to find out how many people are here, or what?
Sure, that would be awesome.
Okay, we're going to launch a poll here, and if you'll reply, that'll help us know who's attending.
All right.
Okay, we have close to 100% responding, so I would say 2/3 of your attendance is SLPs or speech assistants. We have another 10% teachers, some paraprofessionals, a few parents, and then another 10% is other.
Okay, awesome. That helps me a lot. Thanks. Okay, and again, I apologize. It's a little hard sometimes in this format to, thanks for doing that, Lisa, to know your audience. So if I am too repetitive for one group, hopefully another group this is newer information to. And sometimes I always think, yeah, I know it, but it's rephrased in a way that I hadn't thought about of teaching it to if you're an SLP, maybe having that conversation with a parent or a teacher. So again, I apologize if it's redundant, and we'll get going to the next pillar. All right, so the second pillar of the project was hooking it to sight words. So I used the Dolch sight word list, which was compiled with Edwin Dolch clear back in 1948, originally published in the Problems in Reading. Those are 220 service words that must be quickly recognized in order to achieve reading fluency. Those are the Dolch 220. It includes the most frequently used words in the English language, and sight words make up 50 to 70% of any general text. Now, again, some schools use Dolch, some use Fry, some use lists based on specific curriculum. And just like the core word list, you could have a lot of discussion about what list. So the basic premise of this is I looked for overlap between the core words and the sight word list. So we're going to talk about that in a second. And the only reason I want people to really think about this, in the schools, especially in our very testing and assessment-driven curriculum, kids will start, if they're included in a general ed classroom in a kindergarten, being held accountable for the sight words. And that's where this big discussion for me came with some wonderful people. So the question becomes, which is more important? And I would say it's a matter of perspective. If you're an SLP, you of course want communication, so we might be more focused on core. But if you're the teacher and you're going to be held accountable for how many students in your class master X number of sight words, then that reading and those Dolch sight words become really important. So again, because teachers focus on the sight words as a point of measurement, it really cannot be understated. So I guess what I came up with twin powers is we can no longer do this to kids. We can't have half of us working on one thing and the other half of us working on something different and then scratch our heads and wonder why aren't kids using devices all day long in all environments to communicate and advance their literacy skills. So this is really a compromise effort to see each other's point of view and combine our efforts and give students expanded opportunities to practice. So again, I have this conversation with teachers, and this was a slide that actually had a very good friend of mine in mind. I walked into her class, and she's a young teacher who is excellent, and it seems silly, but the, THE, is the first sight word on many kindergarten sight word lists and in most curriculums. So I recently was in a Severny's classroom with 6 functionally nonverbal students, and the word of the week was the. This didn't make any sense to me, but I guess to this young teacher, it made a lot of sense. In that classroom, I had 3 students were trialing touch chat with word power, and 1 was using a switch, and 2 others were on PECs. So clearly, they were functionally nonverbal kids who had a great deal of language to learn, and I felt we needed to shift our focus. And so what I asked her is if you only had 40 words to speak, would you want one of them to be the? And that really framed it in a way for her to understand that while she was energetic and excellent, we needed to shift our focus if her kids were going to make progress. And so we talked about just that reshaping of that thinking, and that literacy instruction needs to be an extension of language development. Another way I phrase it often for school teams is if you were in a foreign country and you could only speak 40 words, would you want the to be one of them? Now again, I use 40 because that's just a general template. Of course I want our kids to speak more than 40, but most of my kids started with far less than 40 words on their devices, so that's just my reference point. All right, so that's how we came up with twin powers unite, or working together. So I cross-referenced the list, and 20 of the words we chose for the first round were on the DLM First 40 list, Karen Erickson's list, and 20 were on the Dolch, the pre-primer or primer list. We also had to cross-reference them. I needed them in a literacy hook, and so I had some Scholastic Sight Word Readers, which was the generally used sight word readers that my kindergartners were starting with. And then one of the things you'll talk about is, even though the 20 words were targeted, there are many other high-frequency words in the text, such as see, play, get. So even though we didn't collect data on those words, they were getting tons of practice with them, and that was our place to start. So here's what the words looked like if you were to map them out on the DLM First 40. The highlighted words were in our first round. And this is what they looked like if you were to map them out on the Dolch sight word list. And this is what you'd look like if you map them out. So I want to say now that, again, they were chosen for 3 reasons. They had to appear on both lists, and they happened to appear in the Scholastic Sight Word Reader list. So they were not necessarily because they were the most important. They were really just what I had the vehicle to teach. So again, what I found doing this project, and you'll see at the end I've given you a free book because I'm starting to write some books, because we get to a point where the text is going to be surpass some of our AAC users' decoding level. But we really wanted to get to the words. So we started where we could, and that's what I would encourage you to do, is start where you can. Whatever book series you have or have access to or can get grant funding to, start there. It doesn't matter. It's more the concept that words are in both lists and that we're combining our efforts instead of maybe going against each other. So then the pillar 3, which was super important, was this idea, oops, I went one ahead, didn't I? This idea of partner augmented input or modeling or language simulated aided input, lots of names for it. But it's a powerful evidence-based approach in which communication partners point to the symbols on the children's device while simultaneously talking. As each book is introduced, an adult will read the book with the AAC device, following a guide created by Chat Editor. And peers will also use this guide to learn and read using their friend's talker. How we teach an umbrella full of people, the device. So what I would say is that as an SLP and a mom, the concept of modeling comes naturally to me. I understand self-talk and parallel talk and expansion and repetition. However, that was not readily being used by my teams of paraeducators and parents and teachers. There was this whole, they were often afraid of the device, and for years had been told that the device was the child's mouth, and we wouldn't touch someone else's mouth, so that we shouldn't be touching their talker. So it's a little bit of a paradigm shift and a whole new way of thinking. However, that being said, I feel like this was the single biggest game changer in my 25 years of doing this. That this has been the biggest game changer. I'm going to have us watch a video because I just think it really exemplifies this, and feel free to use it with your teams when you are looking at a way to, oops. that is a great, great simple video to show parents, to show paraeducators, to get them really thinking, and you probably have to do more training, but that's a great place to start. Let me go, oops, sorry. We're going to go on to our next slide here. The other pillar, pillar 4, was this idea of power of peer modeling, which I stole from the research of Kathy Bork from the University of Kansas. She did a wonderful study about using modeling with children with autism, and she got great results. And of course, it should be a no-brainer, but of course we sometimes forget things that are common sense, that children responded better to peer modeling than they did to adults. They wanted to talk to other kids. Reading partners or book buddies as peers, high expectations for the peer to be in the role as a teacher, and goal is to improve the sight word recognition of both students. Using book as a common denominator helps us generalize. So what we did is we chose students. We have a response to intervention. I think most states have a similar thing in the schools. So we didn't choose the high-achieving student necessarily, but another student in the class who was struggling learning their sight words as well, because there was some para support with our AAC user. So that student was chosen as the peer model, and it really improved all their scores, as the data will show. And here's the other thing I would say is the kids in this generation love technology, so they were thrilled to be able to model for their friend. All right, so again, just some tips on their teaching and modeling vocabulary. We are gonna, I'll let you read that. And again, that's the best recommendation from Karen's and her friends at Center for Literacy and Disability. So how are we going to have kids learn their devices if we don't model? We talk all the time about how if we were teaching sign language to students, that we would have to sign to them for months and months and months, and then we'd be thrilled when they gave us 1 or 2 signs back. And I don't know about you, but for years and years and years, I did the I do, you do, so I modeled once, and then I expected kids to do it right after me. So I think, again, this idea that we might have to do this practice many times is really critical. All right. So the last pillar is these anchor books. We chose a commercial set of books to create paths for a basis for the target words each week. I like that the students have a real book, just like their peers, because sometimes my kids were only given mimeographed or paper copies of books, and I feel like that really empowered them to see themselves as readers. And one of the research, the latest one, if someone has a more recent AAC research that states how many AAC users on grade level, I'd love to have that research. I looked, and at the time, Karen Erickson found in 2013, so it's a little dated, that fewer than 10% of AAC users read beyond the 2nd grade level. So again, we totally need to be focusing on literacy. So what I would say is, again, you can choose a different set of books. This is what we had, and we had some grant money. So what we were allowed to do is that every student, we had 10 students, AAC users, and they were matched with 10 peers, and so they each got a set of books at the end. So again, I targeted for my first round kids in kindergarten or 1st grade who either had the Nova Chat or Touch Chat to communicate, either on a simply 20, 42 basic, or 60 layout, or I had a couple of students who had a PRC accent with a 45 sequence layout. Each student was paired with a peer who also needed to learn his or her sight words, and they were kind of the RTI students. One of the surprises, not surprises, but it was a really nice pairing for some of those students, because for some of those kids with the RTI kiddos, they were not the top student. They really, it helped their self-esteem. They were, it was great kinesthetic work, and by the power of touching the sequences, many of them made really powerful gains, as well as a really strong, powerful connection, social connection to our student. All right, so we collected some data on 3 data points: receptive knowledge in a field of 3, receptive knowledge in a phrase or a sentence, and expressive knowledge. And then we had data sheets, data collection sheets. So one thing I would say I'm going to show you one of these. This is actually my niece, and I did it, and we just, I'm going to show it to you real quick. I would take a video because it seems so basic, but I got lots and lots of questions about how we collected the data. So taking a video and distributing that helps you get some consistency across school.
All right, can you point to the word want? Good job.
And that's all you do.
All right, can you point to the word?
Okay, so I would say that's all we did, and then we had a data sheet for them. We did a sentence data collection point in context. And I would say when we did this, we used the reading guide or that sentence strip view that it's blue in this example, and we sent that out because that's how we followed along with the reading pass. And that's a really great strategy for students to learn as they're embracing reading to help them focus, because some of them have some distractibility issues. And so that was a good strategy to help them. The text that are the samples were sentences taken directly from the books. I had a couple of really hyperlexic students with autism, and so I had talked with a reading specialist, and she really thought this was a critical piece to see how they found words in context. And when we think about that generalization piece, we have some kids who just memorize words, but they're not using them meaningfully, or their comprehension's not there, or they're not finding them in context. So that was really an important piece.
Just looking at this sentence, can you point to the word can?
So again, very straightforward and simple. And then the last piece is we took data based on expressive, and now we gave them credit if they knew it with their device, or some of them are emerging verbal. And I, you know, again, it was professional judgment, but I would tell people if you could understand that word verbally and you were an unfamiliar listener, then you could give them credit. But don't give them credit if they were really just saying the vowels and because of the context you knew the word. So a little bit of professional judgment then. So, you know, we use that as our benchmark.
Okay. What's this word?
You give them a pause when they don't know. Little sister not happy she's not being videotaped.
Nice job. Can you read this word?
So you get the idea. Give them a couple seconds and you'll know if they know it, and if they don't, you just move on. All right. So then the project schedule was we did 2 books a week with 2 to 3 targeted words. We wanted them to work at 5 to 10 minutes a day is all. Each child received a copy of each book. Adults read the selections to both students using the provided guide on Monday. 2 times a week, the adult reads again with the AAC user, maybe shared reading where student fills in the targeted words. 2 times a week, both peers and read the selection together. So that just had to do with how our schedule went. So we wanted them exposed to the books every day, but twice with that peer and twice with an adult user. And we had some data sheets. What I would tell you was the emphasis was on the modeling. It was not the expectation that the child read the paths, which was a common misstep. I wanted the adults to do the reading by modeling how to read the book using the AAC device. And I would tell you that magic happens on about day 3, because by about day 3, after that second or third reading, and maybe a couple more, the AAC user is pushing the adult's hand away like, I can do this. Just like a toddler's like, me do it, that's what happened with our kids. And by week 3, even our adults were saying, oh, I only needed the paths or the guides for the first or second reading, because now I've learned the device, and so I don't need as much support. So there were the steps. If you choose to do this project, this is kind of how I would structure it. I'm going to keep going in the interest of time here. So you'll see that was kind of how we laid out the project, the words, the anchor books, what week was, and then some theme and concepts. That was important because we needed Some of the books clustered around themes such as animals or actions, and then those were nice additional concepts for our therapists to work on. So we created reading paths. So this was the modeling piece for each book on a separate sheet to promote that independence. The reading guide was supplied to block out the extraneous information. We did them, I'll talk about that in a second. One of the things I would say people ask all the time is why you didn't put the paths on the pages of the book. And in the past I have done that, and that's still a really good idea. My reading specialist friends, and I've read several things that say, the eye is trained to look at, and there's lots of research out there that says the eye is trained to look at icons first. So because we wanted at some point kids to know the sight words, not just the icon path, we chose to do it the opposite and not have the paths on the book, but just have them focus on the text. Because by the end, my goal was that the adults, as well as some of the kids, would know how to read and identify that word on their device without the prompt of that picture. So again, that was a professional judgment that we made in this case. I've seen it done other ways, and that's not a bad strategy. I just wanted to give you my rationale for why we did it the way we did it. So here is what a path would look like. One tip that we did later on, so this is a book that we did, where we started, you'll see the paths are sometimes long. So we put the repeated lines, we grouped them together as the students progressed, and that helped them recognize the patterns as well as the groups of words. So just like you would for your verbal kids, where's the repeated line? Oh, we know that word. So instead of writing it out every time, I now wanted kids to understand, oh, that word is the same as it was on the page before, and that line is going to repeat again on the next page. So I need to look for those patterns. And that was another rationale for not always putting the pictures on the page, because I want kids to start recognizing those patterns that they already knew instead of just rote picture matching. So a note about the paths, sometimes we have kids, so we created paths in Word Power Simply 20, 42 Basic, and 60 Basic. That just happened to be where a lot of our kids clustered. We also had them in the Accent, the PRC 45 sequence. And I would just want to say that sometimes when you have discussions about where to start kids, sometimes more is actually less work. So when you look at those paths, you can see that the 60, because there's more words, there's less navigation, it's actually easier. So sometimes showing that to teams as we discuss what's the best place to start. Now again, we need to differentiate and have kids individualize and customize where we need to. So I do have some kids on 20 because of a motor reason or vision reason, and the only thing I would say is, because the paths got pretty long for 20, I would never expect my kids on 20 to read the entire path, but just the target word. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip a little bit of this because we made most of our visual supports using Chat Editor, which is available as a free download for Saltillo. So the next series of slides is going to show you how to do that. I think that you can definitely go on there, use these cheat sheets, or Saltillo has provided some good cheat sheets as well. That being said, while I love Touch Chat and Word Power and Chat Editor, you could absolutely do the same program with students on any AAC device. In fact, like I said before, we use the New Voice, and you can create paths with their download from the PRC company. If you are using a Toby or Proloquo or another app, you can absolutely, and I apologize if I've forgotten one, you can absolutely take screenshots and use the snip tool to create paths as well. It's not specific to this. However, I will say the Chat Editor is really easy to use, as is the New Voice product, and so those help making materials so much easier. So I wanted to get to some examples in the data before we run out of time here. So I just wanted to give you some examples here. This is a little guy with autism who transitioned from PECS to Word Power 60 in a matter of weeks. He's that yay communication story that we all got into this profession for. Because he has autism, the sequence strips work beautifully for him. He thrived on that predictability. His teacher and family were both new to AAC, and having the scripts to follow every week gave them a vehicle to learn his touch chat system. On a side note, because he flew through the books and learned all of his words so quickly, it allowed his school team to see how truly smart he was, and he has since been moved from this self-contained classroom for students with cognitive disabilities to a high-functioning class with autism, because this truly was the vehicle that allowed them to see, oh my gosh, he's got it. So we'll just see this real briefly, a teacher working with him.
Alright, so what I need to do, socks. So, 2 new socks. 2 new socks. 1, 2.
So you see, it was just a really nice session for both of them. The next one is I wanted to show you a paraeducator. I would say this student looks very minimally engaged. He was transitioning to PECS to a device. He is recently on his own NovaChat, which was funded by his private therapist. This paraeducator in particular in this school, I think I have 5 or 6 students on AAC devices, and she was brand new to us, and she has been instrumental in his success, and she would credit Twin Powers as the vehicle which forced her to learn word power as she modeled the books every day. And she's now a strong advocate for not only this student, but for 4 others in her building using word power. And she's also been a terrific asset in bringing other paraeducators on board. So one of those, back to that umbrella of people we talked about, sometimes you need to find that person in the school who's going to be really invested. And as much as I love my colleagues and my SLP contemporaries, you definitely have to be an advocate, but having a paraeducator who is with the child 3 or 4 hours a day on your team and really modeling throughout the day and showing the other paraprofessionals and teachers has been a godsend. So if you can get someone to do it and use this methodology to teach them, it will be wonderful.
Put the star in. Where's the heart?
Next one I just wanted to show you is a student engaging with a peer. And watch closely, because you're going to see that the peer misses a page, and this little guy is going to correct him.
Look. Yellow. Look for yellow.
And at this point, this student has learned the path, so he's reading to the peer as opposed to the peer modeling for him. This is later in the week.
For colors, we have C.
Isn't this so cute?
Thank you for noticing
that. So that just cracks me up, because you go back and corrects him, like you missed a page. All right, and the last one I want to show you, and this little guy and teacher was kind of the momentum for this entire project, because this was the discussion of this little guy who started kindergarten, and they really wanted full inclusion, and he's doing fabulous. But they were starting with those kindergarten sight words, and I said, well, wait a second, let's do something that makes sense, because he also needs some really powerful core words for his communication. So you're going to see how they're using the device during the reading group time. This is in the general ed classroom. He's fully included. Peers use it to begin, and it's a highly coveted role in his class to be his peer helper. And I want to say that they were all very used to the device because he uses it, and like when he's the leader, he uses his device. So it's a beautiful example of inclusion. And I just show this because sometimes people think, oh, I have to have all these special things. This is in the hubbub of a general ed kindergarten classroom.
Ready?
You can see them using the reading guide. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to run out of time. You would have seen that he kind of does a page and then the peer does a page. That's how the teacher later on in the project handled that for her situation. So another component of the project is at the end of the week, we gave both students, the students with the RTI, the peer models, as well as the AAC users, a comment sheet. Why? Because I feel like commenting provides each student with a unique voice and a way to state their opinion. This is often forgotten function of our AAC users, that the function of communication, or one of the most important functions, is to give an opinion. And that way we organize the books by their favorite ones. So when they had extra reading time at the end of the project, they had these 20 books. And so they could say, which one was your favorite? Oh, let's reread that one, because isn't that what we all do? We all reread our favorite books. Then we had some post-intervention data. One note we learned to build in a review week or a practice week, because we had some snow days, and so what turned out to be a 10-week project got to 9, and it was really 8 when we factored in all the missed days we had. Sometimes we have testing and other things that come up in service days, so really be careful about planning for those. So in subsequent cycles, we've slowed it way down because it went a little too fast. All the students were given a book bag because we stored the books, the flashcards, and the comment sheets, as well as a reading pass, so that at the end, those were sent home. Some people chose to send home a book a week, so just like the other kids had reading homework, so did our AAC users, and the expectation was for the parent to read using the provided reading guides to their students every night. And I say that was a wonderful aspect of the project, because a lot of parents said, oh, this was great because I really wanted to use the device, but I really didn't know how, and I really wanted to engage. And I think reading with young kids on a child on your lap, and that coziness really helped make that bond, and that, oh wow, this is just a different way to read, and it's still using their device and their voice. So these were our data collection tools, and we provided these for everyone. So here were our results. I'm going to go pretty quickly so we can get to some other things here at the end. The first results were, you see 7 out of 10 students showed growth. The mean was, and again, in 8 weeks, the average was 4.7 words. We had one student, one of our AAC kiddos, learned 13 words from a receptive standpoint in 8 weeks. So that was really, really remarkable. In our second cycle, where we only did 10 words and we slowed it down, you can see we made a lot of progress as well. And so in hindsight, I probably would have done 1 word a week, because that was a better pacing for most of our schools. And the expressive data point, we had 9 out of 10 kids making progress, and 1 showed mastery pre and post test. That was our hyperlexic student. And again, the mean was 4.8, and the range was 0 to 10. On the second cycle, you'll see we made some really nice growth there as well. In context, 9 out of 10 students showed growth, and again, 1 of them had mastered it. On the first round, I only focused on students in K1, and we've since then expanded the project. In context, again, that mean was 0 to 13 words and 5 words learned. So really, really remarkable results for a very short window of time. When we looked at their peers, they made as much growth in many instances as their peers, and in 1 case, they did better than their peer. So then we did a survey and asked people in the project what worked, how helpful was certain aspects of that. And our top 3 takeaways from staff were that the Twin Powers project was an aid for device generalization. So I counted that as a win, because that was my ultimate goal. Modeling was an effective tool for staff to learn the device. The #1 takeaway from my para-educators is it gave them the tools that they needed to model. And my teachers, I said, that was one of the really unintended consequences because it helped increase everyone's knowledge set of the device 100-fold. And again, the only way that worked was providing those paths allowed that staff to model, because we talk about modeling, but without giving them a very concrete tool, many of our personnel are not doing it. So again, we talked about what worked, and we have continued. We'll talk about that in a second. What were some things we'd do differently? I alluded to this earlier. We would plan for some snow days. We would plan for some assessment days for kids being absent and slow it down. We also have expanded, you'll see this in a second, where we based more on themes, and we've added some supplemental text to promote generalization of language goals and themes. We've created some sentence strips and some writing extensions. We've also written some more user-friendly text because I'm running out of, it's hard for me to find books now that I've done 30 of the 40 words in 3 cycles that meet my needs. So we're writing some books. We have also instituted in many of our classrooms the core word walls, which helps really, we've color-coded them to match touch chat and by parts of speech using that modified Fitzgerald key. And that has been a wonderful tool to kind of have that large group model. And we'll have an example of that in a second. And again, we talked about themes, writing, and we have some apps and some classic books that we have added as well. So an extension activity, this is this fall's round, but so you can see we've added a lot more to the program to make it fit a larger venue. So that original study results were K1. I now have a lot of secondary schools where we've modified the materials to make it more secondary looking, and they are doing it as well because everyone was so excited, and again, it just got such great results as a vehicle to teach everyone the devices. So I'm going to show you one. Here's an extension idea where they took brown bear, and you'll see this whole classroom. We have, I think, 6 kids on devices here, and you can see how that looks. So he did it on his device, and then after he did it on his device, he gets to do it in front of the group.
Blue horse here. I'll hold this while you put it up here. All right. Can you read it? Good job. You ready? Let's read it. I see blue horse. Blue horse. Yellow duck. Hilarious.
So you'll see all the kids now on their devices are making the sentences following that model.
Sorry. What do we think? Sorry. Yeah.
So you see that was a really nice large group activity to help them all work on those core words. So that same school, we have embraced, and I just took this picture, so she then has them make using, so the word is I like to swim, and that's the sentence pairing, and so some kids need the picture, some are at the object level, so they're filling in the like, I like to, and then they have color-coded words for that ending, so they're kind of branching more into how do I build those sentences to merge into writing. Predictable chart writing. You can see I'm a very messy writer the day I did this with the group, but we really worked on I see and then they had the ending words that were different. But again, that predictable chart writing for them to find those patterns. We have in the groups now every week we have that core word of the week. So we have given the staff ideas for how would I use this word me? So we really want people to be modeling if me is the word of the week, and that's what our focus for the sight word was. Where does that appear in reading? Where's that a transition? How's that in social engagement? For my motor therapist or OT and PT, how can we model that in your therapy session? These cutouts here of the me's, those were, we cut those out and we put those on our name badges. So every student, every paraeducator in the classroom, every teacher, every therapist, lots of times throughout the building we'll have secretaries have them, so that as we are talking, we're focusing on like, oh, who had a good weekend? Me. And we'll point to our tag there to just really get kids. I want kids to understand that the words are not just in the books, not just on their devices, but they're living, breathing things in text all around them. So we post this outside of the door and to let everyone know. So if the principal's coming in to observe, maybe she can see if we're using that appropriately, or she can even model using that word. We've added some cut-apart sentences, so we cut those apart, we scramble them, we work on that, end of it to get kids working on writing. So I'm just about out of time, so I'm going really fast. I apologize. So I have written some extension books, and this is the one that you'll see in your materials you're going to get a free copy of. It's going to play really nicely with TouchChat, and you'll get reading paths for simply 20, 42 basic, and 60 basic. And it's also really nice for my secondary students because I wanted something that was not so elementary looking, and so that they would have some good books to read as well. So you'll get those. And I just want to say, in conclusion, I like the way your students use their AAC across settings. And so I hope that you got one or two ideas from this very fast hour of ways that you can reframe your thinking to include some sight words in your discussion and create some reading paths to get kids to hook it to literacy, to get people modeling and devices out and being used all day long. So I had lots and lots of wonderful staff that help with this project that continue to make it better. And I would say we'd open up for questions and concerns, but I'm probably only going to have time to take a couple. And I think, Lisa, are there some housekeeping things that we need to do? Because that's it. Thank you very much. Oops. All right. I don't know if Lisa, are you there?
Yep, sorry, I didn't unmute myself. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining us. We have about 4 minutes left. Oh, I guess only 2 minutes. Okay. But there are 6 questions if you want to address. I put them in the chat window. If we don't get to answer all of them, then what we'll do is go ahead and write up an answer to all of these anyway, and we'll send them out to all of the attendees.
Okay, let me answer a couple questions. Let me see. Okay, so Lisa made a comment that we do have some chat editor webinars if you need.
Yeah, it's under there. I put all the questions.
So, how do you help drive the direction of SLP to use so much of the PECS model? You know, we really have lots of students who use PECS as well, and so I didn't give an example, but I think that I think there are some overlap. I mean, clearly PECS looks for that reinforcer, and so a lot of those are nouns, so getting beyond. But the I see, I want, it is, those are all core words, so I think you can go from that angle. Sometimes we have kids who, by virtue of doing some modeling, they will surprise us, and they may be ready for dynamic display, even when previously we thought they were not. So again, this might not be for everyone. So if you have students with PECS, I don't know them individually, so it's hard to make that judgment. But we do have many students who do that, and we try to bring the core in. For them, I would say to do one word, and so maybe they can even match that word in the text that they have the Velcro picture of. Let's see. It says, I got really excited at the idea of using the pathways to model to the student while reading, but then I realized that I have an iPad that has TouchChat with word power, so if I'm working with student one-on-one that also has word power, would you suggest that I just continue model? Oh, yes, you can absolutely model from your own device. You do not need 2 devices. We do that all the time, and in fact, even when I have 2 devices, I sometimes find that cumbersome, so often I just use their device. One thing I would say, and I didn't get into it, when we do the trainings, we talk about one of the fears that people have when they start doing that partner augmented input is that they don't know it well enough to model, and so they're very afraid of making a mistake. And we do a lot of talking with people like, that is okay. As verbal communicators, we all make mistakes. Developmentally, when kids are learning to speak, they make mistakes. And if anything, I tell people that's a bonus because It frees the student up from A, thinking they can only talk when they can say it perfectly, and B, it's kind of that metacognitive thinking that, oh, I'm going to talk about my thinking, so oops, I thought tree was going to be under weather, but actually it's in nature. Oh, look at that. I thought of one way, but here's another way. And it kind of teaches kids that flexibility of thinking. So that sometimes our imperfections sometimes can be turned into a good teachable moment. Okay.
That's the end of our webinar, and we'll go ahead and address the rest of the questions, and we can send an email out so that everybody will get answers to all the questions.
Okay. All right. Thanks for joining.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.